The committee will come to order. Today we're considering the nominations of Ms. Shalonda Young to be the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, and Mr. Jason Miller to be OMB's Deputy Director for Management. Certainly welcome both of you, and I know you have your family with you, and look forward to having you introduce them shortly. I want to first off congratulate you on your nominations and thank you for your willingness to serve our nation in these very critical roles. Our country is facing a historic public health and economic challenge, and over the past year, the coronavirus pandemic has taken more than 510,000 American lives. It has also devastated communities, families, and businesses in Michigan as well as all across our country. If confirmed, not only will you both play a key role in shaping and implementing the American Rescue Plan, a comprehensive relief package that will provide critical aid to Michiganders and Americans across the nation, but also developing President Biden's budget and policy agenda across the government. In your respective roles, you'll be responsible for evaluating and coordinating policy decisions to help the country recover from the pandemic, from getting vaccines in the arms of people as quickly and equitably as possible, to reopening our schools and our economy swiftly and safely. You will also have to help address the long-term challenges that we face, including bolstering our nation's cybersecurity infrastructure, advancing science-based public health, worker safety and environmental protections, as well as strengthening our federal workforce. You will also be responsible for ensuring that federal agencies are addressing and prioritizing the needs of communities of color and other underserved and vulnerable populations. As part of OMB leadership, it will be your duty to ensure that the federal government is working efficiently and in a transparent manner to deliver for the American people. I certainly believe that both of you bring that kind of experience and expertise and dedication to public service that is needed to help steer the country through this unprecedented time. I expect OMB will work closely with this committee as we take on the difficult task ahead of us. And I look forward to hearing about the serious challenges we are facing today and how we can work together to tackle them. So thank you both again for your willingness to serve and for being here with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Portman.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. Glad to join you at the hearing today, and welcome to the witnesses. Look forward to hearing from you. I've enjoyed our conversations we've had by telephone, and it's good to have you here in person, and look forward to having you introduce your family members who are with you. As you all know, I think this agency is absolutely critical to our government, and probably the least known, but one of the most important agencies of government. It's Office of Management and Budget, so the purview is almost boundless. Management of every agency, every department, every program, not direct management, but the oversight of it, and that responsibility would fall on you as the two deputies, should you be confirmed. And then, of course, the budget side, incredibly important. But OMB also looks at every regulation. OMB also looks at every policy. It looks at every statement that comes out of the White House and has to approve it, so it's a huge responsibility. And I'm glad you're willing to step up and take it on. As Deputy Director of the office and then as the Deputy for Management, respectively, it's important that you both have a background in your respective roles, budgeting, management, but also an understanding of all those policy issues, regulations, and actions that OMB reviews and coordinates across the agencies. Even more important to me is the ability to work with folks within the administration, the agencies, and with Congress. And Chairman Peters just talked about the COVID-19 package. I hope we don't see a repeat of that, because that's not working with Congress. It's working with one side of Congress. And both of you have backgrounds where you have worked on a bipartisan basis. Ms. Young, in particular, on the Appropriations Committee, that's how you operate. and I've spoken to some of the cardinals, who were previously in charge, who were Republicans, who worked with you, and some who, as ranking members, worked with you. And they said you did work with them. And that's very important. On COVID, 5 times we've done that in the last year. And unfortunately, this latest time, the administration chose to go a different route. I think it's a mistake for the country. I certainly think it's a mistake for trying to build some bipartisanship going forward on other issues that OMB will be very involved with, like infrastructure. So I hope you are going to be a voice within the administration to say that you're willing and able to work with both sides and find that middle ground and get things done. On the crises that we face, COVID-19 is at the top of the list, but it has spawned other crises, including an epidemic crisis underneath the pandemic. With regard to substance abuse and overdoses, we now believe we are in a year where we're going to have the highest overdose death rate in the history of our country, which is such a heartbreaking reality because we were making good progress until the pandemic. We also know that our children's education and development has been set back thanks to this coronavirus pandemic. And that's a long-term issue we've got to address. I spoke to some folks this week who tell me that they're educators, that they believe the students that they're in charge of teaching and developing have lost a year. That's a big deal. And of course, there are emotional scars that go along with that. There's a mental health crisis in addition to the opioid and the drug addiction crisis more generally. So higher suicide rates along with the record number of overdose deaths. So there's lots to do post-COVID-19 to sort of knit this society back together. And finally, I will say I hope you will be willing to focus on fraud in these programs that we have set up. It, to me, is unbelievable we're not doing more, particularly to address the fraud in the unemployment insurance system as we pump hundreds of billions of dollars of federal money in and we find out that there are organized, international in some cases, foreign criminal organizations that are taking advantage of hard-earned taxpayer money to steal from our taxpayers and to fraudulently take federal funds. But it's true with a lot of these programs. We've heard with regard to every one of these big programs that there is significant fraud. That will be something that we look forward to talking to you about today and getting you engaged with should you be confirmed. I will say part of that is that there are innocent Americans out there, including our constituents, Chairman Peters and myself, who are bearing the brunt of this fraud because people are stealing their identity and then getting checks illegally, and then the government's coming back on the constituents who knew nothing about it. And we're hopeful that we can pass an amendment to the COVID bill to address that in the next 24 hours. But it's even worse than it might appear because of its impact on so many people. The cyber attacks we've seen recently, this massive SolarWinds attack, is unprecedented. We look forward to your comments on that. Cybersecurity is one of the 5 high-risk areas that's actually gotten worse since 2019 based on a hearing we had in this room 2 days ago. So clearly we're moving in the wrong direction in terms of securing our federal networks. I know Chairman Peters and I want to work closely with OMB in that regard because OMB has a huge role to play, particularly with regard to the agencies and making sure they're meeting their requirements. So I'm hopeful we can work together to address these challenges, to rebuild the economy as we come out of COVID-19, which is, likely to happen despite all the issues I talked about. The economy is beginning to grow already, and I think that's the good news, and I think it will continue as the vaccines become more widely available in ways that a lot of pent-up demand will help us to move forward. If confirmed, the two of you will play an important part in all of these efforts. And so, Ms. Young and Mr. Miller, I look forward to hearing your thoughts today on these important issues and other critical ones that would face OMB should you be confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Today we have some help recognizing our nominees from some of our Senate and House colleagues. So next I'd like to recognize Senator Leahy, who has a video introducing Ms. Young.
I'm very happy to be here today to introduce Shalonda Young. She's President Biden's nominee to be Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Now, for the members of this committee who also sit on the Appropriations Committee, Shalonda's a familiar face. She's worked on the House Appropriations Committee for nearly 16 years. She's been the House Appropriations Staff Director since 2017. Actually, it's in that capacity I had the pleasure to really get to know her well, and I can tell you without reservation, I can think of no one better suited to be Deputy Director at OMB than Shalanda. Her deep understanding of the often arcane federal budget process, her years of experience on the Appropriations Committee, her tenacity, her dedication to public service, her honesty will serve the agency and the American people. Shalanda began her career in public service in 2001 at the National Institutes of Health. She came first to work on Capitol Hill as a detailee with the House Appropriations Committee in 2005. She really made a good impression because she returned in 2007. She worked her way up on the committee over the years. Her work in developing the budget for and conducting oversight of key agencies has given her critical insights into the operation of some of our nation's most important agencies, including, of course, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency, the General Services Administration. She even served as the staff director for the Legislative Branch Subcommittee overseeing the budget for Congress. And she became staff director of the House Appropriations Committee in 2017. Coincidentally, that was the same year I became vice chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And since that time, she's had to help the House navigate some of the most difficult issues before the chamber. She has a reputation as a tough but fair negotiator. That's high praise on Capitol Hill. And I can attest to the truth of these statements. I've seen these skills firsthand. Let me tell you a story. Shalanda was a critical figure in helping to end the government shutdown in January 2019. I remember the evening we cut the final deal to end the 35-day government shutdown, the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Chairman Shelby, Chairwoman Lowy, Ranking Member Kay Granger, and I, along with only a very few but highly trusted staff, went to my office in the Capitol. We continued talks that started earlier that day. We wanted to get away from being watched by everybody, from lobbyists to the press, away from the cameras. We wanted to see if we could reach a deal. But fortunately, Shalanda was with us. As we worked into the night on these difficult issues, her knowledge of a vast range of federal programs, her understanding of the political process, and her determination to get the country we love back on track helped us reach a deal. We shook hands on it that night. And we went out, the four of us, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, we announced it to the press. If you look closely at pictures from that moment, Shalanda is there in the background. Hopefully she's as proud of that moment as I am. It was a difficult time for our nation, but through determination and hard work, we reached a solution. And that's what Shalanda is best at. She knows how to work across the aisle to get a deal done. Her relationships with both Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate will serve her well. I've heard it said that the Office of Management and Budget is one of the most powerful government agencies that most Americans have never heard of. It's true. It wields incredible influence over not just the federal budget, but over policies that affect people's lives. We need people like Shalonda Young to help steer the agency in these important decisions. She's wonderful.
Next, I'd like to recognize Senator Cassidy, who is joining us virtually. Senator Cassidy, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, and thank you, Mr. Portman, and thank you all the members of the committee. As Senator Leahy just said, this position is one of the most important decisions that no one ever hears of. And among the qualifications to be a political appointee in this position includes a willingness to look beyond partisanship and to really accept the intent of Congress when passing a law in order to meet the needs of the American people and to respect the role of Congress. So this willingness to do so is a prerequisite to be approved for this position. So with this in mind, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Shalonda Young to be the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. The reason I have this privilege is that Ms. Young was born in Clinton, Louisiana, and grew up in Clinton and in Baton Rouge. Her parents, Lois and Ronald Smith, her grandfather and her grandmother, and other family still live in Louisiana. Ms. Young graduated from Loyola University, New Orleans, and Tulane University. She is now, as was just said, a staff director for the House Appropriations Committee, and in this role has worked with both Democrats and Republicans to achieve the goals of our country. Now, recalling what I said earlier, that this position requires someone with a history of looking beyond partisanship, I was so pleased to receive this message today from a former Republican House Appropriations staffer. I'm quoting from the message. I hear you're introducing Shalonda Young today. She's amazing, smart, and such a pro. She can explain difficult concepts and has the gravitas required to speak truth to power and cut deals. Plus, she's very pleasant and funny, a great lady. Thanks so much for supporting her. She understands what's needed to do this job. As a longtime congressional aide, she has cultivated relationships with lawmakers in both parties. Now, it isn't just fellow staff members that speak so highly of Ms. Young. I note there is a list of strong bipartisan Senate support. Last week, my Republican colleague from Alabama, Senator Shelby, said, quote, she's smart, she knows the process inside out, and she's an honest broker who has demonstrated the ability to work with both sides to get things done. Senator Sanders is about as far away from Senator Shelby you can get in terms of the political spectrum. Speaking to her experience, says, quote, she has done an excellent job in working with Democrats and Republicans. My Democratic colleague, Chair Leahy, just spoke, and she said, that's what Shalonda is best at. She knows how to work across the aisle and get the deal done. And my Republican colleague from South Carolina, Senator Graham, said, everybody that deals with you on our side has nothing but good things to say. These days, wide bipartisan support is rare, but when Senators Graham, Leahy, Sanders, and Shelby agree, either we're in some sort of weird space-time continuum, or the nominee is exceptionally capable. Because she's from Louisiana, I know it's the latter. She's exceptionally capable. There are unique challenges ahead of us as we recover from the pandemic. Ms. Young is a qualified individual with a distinguished career in public service. I look forward to the committee and the Senate approving her nomination. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. Next, I'm pleased to welcome my friend and a colleague from Michigan, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, who will introduce Mr. Miller today.
Chair, I'm Congresswoman Haley Stevens, proudly representing Michigan's 11th District. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and distinguished members of the committee, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you my former colleague and dear friend, Jason S. Miller, as you consider him to fill the important role of Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget in the White House. My friendship and collaboration with Jason goes back to our days working together in the administration of President Barack Obama, where he served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of the National Economic Council. As Jason often likes to remind me, I was the very first face he saw when he walked into government on his first day. In the roles where Jason served, he continuously found new ways to help government work for people. As his biography will tell you, he played critical roles. If it was from working to help Puerto Rico address its crisis, to helping develop the Select USA, the first ever federal effort to bring job creating investment to the United States from around the world. And he also helped to launch Manufacturing USA, a network of public-private partnerships, manufacturing institutes aimed at securing the future of manufacturing in the United States. His biography will also show his strong record of management expertise, from his multiple graduate degrees, time with the Boston Consulting Group and Maricon Associations, executive roles in the Obama administration, and his most recent leadership position as the CEO of the Greater Washington Partnership. What his biography will not tell you is that many of his achievements have had long-lasting impacts that make government function better for taxpayers. The Manufacturing USA Institutes, for instance, that he helped to launch, have proliferated into a network of 14 public-private partnerships that sprang into action at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, when members of Congress and community leaders were fielding calls from hospitals, nursing homes, and businesses who were desperate for personal protective equipment due to the supply chain disruption, when they were eager for ventilators and other life-saving materials. Since that time, Manufacturing USA Institutes have served as critical connectors for innovative manufacturers and industry partners who rose to meet our national need for those who have been helped with those supplies. And it was Jason's vision of a multi-connected consortia of university partners, small businesses, large businesses, and the federal government through interagency effort coming together to solve problems. And boy, did they ever in one of our greatest moments of need. Certainly, beyond his far-reaching capabilities, Jason is above all a dedicated servant to the ideals of our country. The ideal of service being something greater than oneself that is meant to be the fabric of how he will serve in this role and how he will continue to make the United States of America proud. I urge you to consider his confirmation as Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget, and I thank you greatly for your time.
Now it's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. So if both of you would stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Ms. Young, you may now proceed with your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today as President Biden's nominee for the Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. I want to thank Chairman Leahy and my home state senator, Senator Cassidy, for introducing me to the committee today. One of the joys of being staff director of the Appropriations Committee has been seeing the amazing relationships and results that have come from Chairman Leahy, former Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Granger, and my former boss, Chairwoman Lowy. I still vividly remember those four, as you heard Chairman Leahy talk about this same meeting to avert another government shutdown back in February of 2019. Even in those tense moments, Senator Leahy still took the time to show me pictures of his beloved family before announcing to the press that a compromise had been reached. I will forever be grateful for the kindness Senator Leahy has shown even in the most stressful environments. And Senator Cassidy, it has been a delight to get to know you during this process. There haven't been many people I could discuss Baton Rouge High Schools with since I moved to D.C., and I certainly appreciate the Louisiana hospitality you and your staff have shown. I'm accompanied today by my partner, William Durham, my parents who were here earlier this week, and my grandmother are watching from Louisiana. I want to thank William, my family, and friends for their unwavering support over the years. Members of this distinguished committee, I come before you today as someone who grew up in rural America. I spent most of my youth in Clinton, Louisiana. Back then, Clinton had a population of around 2,000. Like a lot of rural America, it's lost 20 to 30% of its population. It's where my maternal great-grandparents lived, got married, and had my grandmother in 1928. Somehow, even then, in the segregated South, my great-grandparents sent their child, my grandmother, to college. I'm grateful they prioritized education, a commitment that has stayed in my family for generations. All families deserve to see their children have that same opportunity to pursue their potential. Another former boss of mine, Chairman Obie, used to say a budget is your values. I share that belief and firmly believe that the federal budget can and should make the promise of this country real for all families in all communities. I have spent the last 4 years as both the minority and majority staff director of the House Appropriations Committee. I care deeply about the institution of Congress and have been very proud to serve in a position that required compromise to ensure the American people had not only a functioning government, but one that invested in their future. My work on the Appropriations Committee taught me that both sides can compromise without compromising their values, even when that means no one gets everything they want. I will forever be indebted to this institution, and if confirmed, I look forward to using my experience in these halls to ensure both branches operate with mutual respect and work towards solutions that will improve the lives of those we serve. I am not naive about the challenges we face. Last year, I worked on the first COVID-19 supplemental for Congress passed in March of 2020. We were using models of past supplementals for Ebola and Zika because the full scale of the pandemic was still unclear. With COVID-19 deaths surpassing 500,000, our focus must remain on beating the virus, delivering immediate relief to millions of struggling Americans, and ensuring that we emerge from this crisis even stronger than we were before. If confirmed, I look forward to engaging with members of Congress from both parties on this and other important work. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Porter, and other distinguished members, thank you for allowing me to be here today to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Young, for those opening comments. Mr. Miller, you may proceed with your opening comments.
Thank you. Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Portman, and members of the committee, thank you for your service and for the opportunity to be here in front of you today. And thank you to Congresswoman Haley Stevens, my good friend, for that incredibly kind introduction. Haley is right. She is the very first face that I saw when I began my prior public service. I'm humbled to be President Biden's nominee for the Deputy Director of Management for the Office of Management and Budget. Serving the American people is a privilege. Having the opportunity to serve in a role with such broad responsibilities to ensure our federal government is delivering every single day for the American people would be an honor. I'm accompanied today by my wife, Katie Platt Miller. Undoubtedly, I would not be here without her support and her wisdom. And I want to thank her and my family for their willingness to allow me to serve and the sacrifices that they are willing to make if I am confirmed. I also want to thank my parents, Peggy and David Miller, who taught me the importance of integrity, hard work, and kindness. And my three children that could not be here today, Annabelle, Theo, and Cora, who always keep me on my toes. Public service is my way to give back to a country that has given me and my family so much. My grandfather, after whom I am named, left Eastern Europe in 1913, escaping anti-Semitism and all that came with it, for a better life, settling with his parents and 7 siblings in Flint, Michigan. My other grandfather served our country in World War II, a Jew put in charge of the care of German prisoners of war. Upon returning, through the GI Bill, he completed college, going into business in Chicago, and starting a family with my grandmother. Today would have been my grandmother's 92nd birthday. She passed in December, and I carry her love and fondness for good food with me today. These are American stories, creating a better life and a better world for our children, something that each of us should have the opportunity to pursue. The challenges we face today as a country are substantial. It is in times like these when Americans expect their government to deliver, to beat back the pandemic, to provide critical relief, to create the conditions for recovery, to protect our security, and to position our country to lead. The Office of Management and Budget sits at the heart of the executive branch, responsible for ensuring federal agencies are doing just that, delivering on the President's priorities and the laws enacted by the Congress. In my experience, successful delivery is built on 3 pillars: ambitious goals built around clear priorities, a system for measurement and accountability, and a talented, energized, and dedicated team. The role of the Deputy Director for Management is to ensure those pillars are in place, that the support functions to enable agency missions are up to the task, that we are building a high-performance government, and that we have the very best of the American people serving their fellow citizens. In my prior time in federal government, I had the opportunity to work closely with the talented career staff at OMB, and if confirmed, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to do so again. Our committed federal workers are an asset to our country, and addressing our challenges will require strengthening and energizing our federal workforce and inspiring even more Americans to serve. I began my career in management consulting, working with large corporations to build smart strategies, create organizations to deliver on those strategies, and put in place the measures to manage and monitor strong performance. I spent nearly 7 years in public service at the White House, tackling a wide range of economic policy issues at the highest levels of government. Since then, I led an organization which I helped to build from the ground up, working on the most challenging economic issues at the state and local levels here in this region. The common thread across those experiences in the private, public, and nonprofit sector is that I get stuff done. It is what drives me, is what I believe is needed right now, and if confirmed, I would be honored to wake up every day and get stuff done for the American people. Thank you for inviting me before this committee, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Miller. Before we get started, there are 3 questions that this committee asks of every nominee and for the record. So let me just ask both of you. I'll start with Ms. Young and then Mr. Miller, if you would answer these questions and respond quickly. A yes or no is appreciated as well. First, is there anything you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office which you have been nominated?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Second, do you know of anything, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you have been nominated?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Lastly, do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you. Michiganders, as well as people all across the country, are still facing significant challenges as a result of the pandemic. And President Biden has certainly made it clear that the pandemic response needs a whole of government approach and that we need to take bold action to recover. And if confirmed, you both will play a central role in coordinating the federal government's pandemic response efforts. So this question is to both of you. How do you envision OMB helping to lead and coordinate the administration's pandemic response efforts? And if confirmed, is there 1 or 2 priorities in that area that you want to talk about? We'd certainly love to hear. Ms. Young, if you could start.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. Clearly, there's nothing more pressing in front of our country, and I think I hope it's a one-in-a-generation challenge for this country, both a health pandemic affecting the health of Americans and also one that is leading us, unfortunately, into economic crisis. So certainly I believe OMB will be at the center of development of legislative proposals, funding, and policy to help the administration work with Congress to respond to the health effects and the economics of the pandemic. So I certainly think OMB will be central to that effort. I've worked on most of all of the legislation last year as staff director of the Appropriations Committee. I'm very proud of the work that Congress did, as Senator Portman pointed out, in a bipartisan manner. But it's hard to claim success when 500,000 Americans have lost their lives. So I certainly see more work to be done. I know I'm not confirmed, but I understand the work of Small Business Program, PPP, for example. That is one area where some administrative cleanup and action to make sure that that funding is getting to the smallest of the smalls. And I think there's more work to be done there. And I certainly hope that I'm confirmed and can help ensure that aid is getting to the right mom and pop businesses, because they're the backbone of our economy. Mr. Chairman, I think I touched on most of it. I certainly want to continue to work on that. And we also, after this package, hopefully the Senate comes to conclusion on this week, we'll have to continue to monitor to make sure we get vaccines to everyone and work with Congress if we need another package. We have to crush the virus to have a quick economic recovery.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Peters, and I appreciate the question. First and foremost, I agree with Ms. Young. Issue number one in front of us is tackling the pandemic, beating back the pandemic, and providing economic relief to Americans, creating both to address the current struggles and to create a foundation for recovery. If confirmed, in my role as Deputy Director for Management, one key first priority is making sure that we are operating effectively, efficiently, minimizing waste, and delivering relief, delivering on getting vaccines to people with shots in their arms fast, consistent with the laws enacted by the Congress. The second piece that I think is important and critical at this time is ensuring that all federal agencies are delivering on their critical missions, even while they're learning and to operate in new and different ways in order to keep federal workers safe, to keep Americans safe in the delivery of those services. So both OMB's central role in tackling the overall issue and making sure the entirety of the federal government is operating effectively and safely is absolutely critical, and I would look forward to the opportunity, if confirmed, to work with this committee to make sure we're doing just that.
Well, thank you. Both of you have mentioned the need for us to get vaccines out as quickly as possible and get into as many arms as possible, and clearly that's the best way for us to get to the other side of this pandemic. Ms. Young, you and I had an opportunity to talk earlier about that, and particularly my concern, which I know you fully share, is the need to make sure that underserved communities and communities of color have the response in a national crisis or localized crisis that in the past they may not have received. And clearly we need to make sure that vaccine distribution is going and fully available to communities of color and other vulnerable communities and rural communities. What role do you see playing in that effort?
Senator, as pointed out in this hearing several times, I think OMB has wide berth in being able to work with the agencies, and certainly with HHS. I would certainly be interested in being a part of the solution. I think I watch my own family. I have a 92-year-old grandmother have to search for a vaccine. She should be at the front of the line. It should not be difficult to find that. And I certainly know each of the states faces their own challenges. I think there is more of a role for the federal government to ensure that there are some baselines being met across the states to ensure vulnerable populations are taken care of. And just simple placement of where you put vaccine distribution can make a huge difference. So I certainly look forward to working with you on this very important issue.
Well, thank you. Earlier this week, the Government Accountability Office issued a report requested by Senator Carper, me, and Senator Johnson, showing that the previous administration made very little progress in addressing PFAS contamination across our country. These are basically toxic forever chemicals. Ms. Young, given OMB's role in reviewing science-based public health and environmental protections and supporting the federal government's efforts to address PFAS contamination, how will you ensure that federal agencies make real progress to protecting our drinking water and expediting the cleanup of these sites?
Senator, while during my confirmation process, I've not been at the administration part of decisions. My understanding is EPA and OMB are working expeditiously, especially on the hazardous label for something I think we all recognize in a bipartisan manner is a hazardous chemical that's been used in many ways, but also by our federal government, by the Department of Defense a lot for firefighting. And there are lots of communities who now, I think, rightfully look to their federal government and ask, what are you going to do to help clean this up? So I do believe OMB also has a role in ensuring that we have enough federal resources to help those communities where the federal government has used those chemicals.
Thank you. Last real quick question that can be answered yes or no by each of you. If confirmed, do you commit to ensuring swift OMB review of agency actions to address the PFAS crisis? Ms. Young?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Miller?
Sure.
Great. Good to hear from both of you. Thank you again, Ranking Member Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you both for being here in your testimony so far this morning. We talked about COVID-19 a minute ago, and I just have to interject here. I believe we need new legislation on COVID-19, but I think it needs to be far more targeted than what we have before us. And as an example, the $1.9 trillion is more money than we spend in our annual appropriations bill on the discretionary spending side. Is that true, Ms. Young? How much do we spend every year in Congress?
About 1.4.
About 1.4. So the 1.9 alone is more than we spend in an entire year on discretionary spending. And the question is, where's that money going? And some of it's going to good purposes. I think the healthcare side is really important, the vaccines, distribution, and development. Some of it is going to areas that, frankly, have a lot of money right now because less than half, we're told, of what was just appropriated at the end of the year has actually gone out, which was $900 billion. And so I guess my question to you is, will you work with us in the future to make these things more targeted, to ensure taxpayer money is well used? And with regard to the economy, Mr. Miller, you said you thought we needed new legislation to create a foundation for future economic growth. Do you not believe the economy is growing now? We just had, in January, we had a 10% increase in income, in household income. The Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan group up here, tells us that the economy is growing, and they believe by halfway through this year, we'll be back to where we were pre-pandemic in terms of our GDP. So I guess a couple questions. One, will you work with us on a more targeted approach? And will you work with us on ensuring we have economic growth? And by the way, CBO says that will happen without any new stimulus, new report out today saying only 20% of the money that was in the stimulus checks last time actually got spent. The rest of it was mostly saved. So wonder if you have any thoughts on that, both of you, for going forward, how do we work together better?
Senator Portman, thank you for that question. You have my commitment to work with you on a whole litany of things, and certainly on any future need for stimulus in the economy. I'm happy. I think we can only solve this together. So you certainly have my commitment to working on that. And I think you've seen some evidence of a willingness by this administration. I've not been a part of it. I've not seen the final Senate package, but I think if reports are true, there has been a willingness to look at some more targeting of those funds. So you certainly have my commitment, and I think the administration, as we speak, is working with senators to ensure that there is targeted relief to the American people.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Senator, Ranking Member Portman, thank you for the question, and I concur with Ms. Young on my commitment to work with you, members of this committee. First, on the overall current situation that we're in, 10 million Americans are out of work. Measures like weekly unemployment insurance claims are still historically high, so I think we face deep economic challenges, but you are correct that the GDP numbers, the GDP growth rates, have been high. The issues even prior to the pandemic were deep-seated, and I think we need to take appropriate investment looking forward once we make sure we have a strong foundation in place regarding our recovery. Irrespective, if confirmed in my role as the Deputy Director for Management, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you and members of the committee to make sure that we're operating the programs that have been enacted by the Congress efficiently and effectively, including addressing concerns that have been raised in past programs or new programs.
Including going after fraud, you make a commitment to that today?
Yes, yes, sir.
As we talked about earlier. On Buy America, I was pleased to see President Biden sign an executive order with the intent of strengthening the Buy America Act, and in some ways it actually mirrors our bipartisan BuyAmerican.gov bill. In other ways, the executive order actually weakens the domestic content requirements, specifically by replacing the existing component test with a new value-added test that actually reduces the procurement of U.S. content. Will you commit to correcting this problem and to protect the integrity of the Buy America Act?
Ranking Member Portman, thank you for the question and commend you for your work and leadership on this issue. I think it's critical that our procurement policies are enacting strong domestic preference requirements. As I understand it, the intent of the EO is to do just that and make sure that procurement is increasing the amount of domestic economic activity, and you have my commitment to work with you to ensure that it does just that.
Okay. I hope you work with Senator Murphy and me on our legislation as well, which codifies some of what was just done, but actually, I think does a better job of protecting American workers. Ms. Young and Mr. Miller, last year, Senator Carpenter and I introduced a bill called the Safeguarding American Innovation Act as a result of two investigations by this committee regarding Confucius Institutes in one case and Thousand Talents program, China's Thousand Talents program in the other case. The legislation would help stop foreign governments, particularly China, from stealing American technology. And this is usually taxpayer-funded research and intellectual property. A critical part of the legislation would establish a Federal Research Security Council at OMB to close the gap we identified in coordination and information sharing among the various federal agencies that provide most of the funding for that research. Would you commit to supporting the Safeguarding America Innovation Act?
Senator Portman, I'm more than familiar with the goals. I have not seen every detail of the act, but I'm committed to working with you on that legislation to make sure the goals of it are implemented. It makes common sense to make sure our research is protected, and you certainly have my commitment to work with you on that.
Great. We'll get you the legislation, and would love to have your help, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Agreed, it's a key issue in making sure that our research enterprise, our academic institutions are protected, and we welcome the opportunity to work with you on that issue.
Okay. On permitting reform, we talked about this in our conversations, and I appreciate your support generally for the FAST 41 bill I co-sponsored in 2015, bipartisan bill that establishes Federal Permitting Improvement Council, by the way, which has saved well over $1 billion in terms of permitting and many years of permitting for major projects. We specifically gave OMB a big role. It was a fight, frankly, with the Obama administration, and they conceded at the end and gave you, if you are to be confirmed at OMB, the coordinating role as putting together the council and coordinating these large projects that would be covered. I appreciated our conversations again, and I want to ensure that we can work together to lift the sunset that's otherwise going to happen on FAST 41. I want to ask you now in this forum, will you commit to working with me to pass a sunset removal for FAST 41 that retains the current law as written?
It's hard to argue with success, and that act has had a lot of success, so certainly commit to working with you on the sunset removal.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
I would absolutely commit to working with you on it. The reported benefits of the Permitting Council thus far are substantial, and I think as we're considering infrastructure investment, increased infrastructure investment, it's absolutely imperative that federal permitting is working and working efficiently.
Great. My time has expired. I have so many more questions for you, but I have a sense that we'll probably have an opportunity to have that conversation over the next couple of years. So thank you for your answers today and for your commitment to service.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Chair recognizes Senator Hessen for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Portman. Thank you to both of our nominees this morning, and thank you and your families for your willingness to serve. We greatly appreciate it. I want to start with a question to Ms. Young. A few weeks ago, I asked Ms. Tandon to commit to completing the federal program inventory. Having this inventory will improve transparency and help eliminate wasteful spending by allowing policymakers and the public to access information about federal costs and programs. If confirmed, will you also commit to completing the inventory and working with me to eliminate programs that are duplicative, wasteful, or no longer necessary?
You absolutely have my commitment.
Thank you. And now a question to both of you. I just want to discuss federal information technology systems. Information technology supports all federal operations from accessing healthcare to combating terrorism. So we need those who craft policies, as you both would do if confirmed, to recognize how IT shapes program outcomes, drives costs, and delivers a level of service that the American people expect in the 21st century. If confirmed, will you ensure that agencies analyze the impacts that their information technology systems may have on program costs and the ability of the agency to meet program goals? Ms. Young?
Senator, I add another topic, improper payments and fraud. I think data is essential to that, and some of the lackluster information technology systems helps ensure that we can't fix that problem. So you certainly have my commitment to working on those issues.
Thank you. And Mr. Miller?
Senator Hassan, thank you for the question. Absolutely commit to working with you on this topic. I think as we step back, it is safe to say that we're not getting adequate ROI today on our IT investments as a federal government. We've made progress, as I understand it, but there's a lot more to do. There's clearly the element around cybersecurity, where modernizing our IT systems would improve our overall cyber posture, and there's investment within the American Rescue Plan to support some of that, but I hope that's an issue that we can work together on to further those goals.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to follow up a little bit more on the whole issue of legacy IT with you, Ms. Young, and then with you, Mr. Miller. So to Ms. Young, last year the federal government spent $90 billion on IT systems. About one-third of those funds, $29 billion, was spent on maintaining legacy systems. As I discussed with Comptroller General Dodaro earlier this week, legacy systems can create compounding technical debt, leading to increased costs and security vulnerabilities and preventing the federal government from meeting the customer service expectations of the American people. The Office of Management and Budget plays a critical role in eliminating antiquated systems and technical debt and holding agencies accountable for sticking to their modernization plans. And you've both just talked about different ways that our being behind here has impacted our current systems. So to you, Ms. Young, if confirmed, will you commit to modernizing legacy IT systems to improve services for citizens and save taxpayer dollars?
I commit to that. Also, from my current seat on the Appropriations Committee, it's going to take resources.
Yeah.
You know, we've dealt with budget caps over the last 10 years, and when your choice is between programs that impact families and IT systems, sometimes IT systems have not won out.
Right. Well, let me get to that, because one of the major challenges here in eliminating legacy systems and replacing them with cost-effective modern systems is the one-year budget and appropriation cycle, which cannot always accommodate the time it takes for agencies to plan and execute system upgrades. So how are you going to work with agencies and congressional appropriators to ensure that the agencies have the flexibility that they need to commit to modernization efforts?
Senator, the group of bipartisan members on the House and Senate side, I think, envisioned the Technology Modernization Fund to help solve some of those problems. So have a centralized place. You may not get everything the first year, but have funding in one place. So GSA, with OMB's assistance, can look across those agencies and do some forward planning, and not just on an annual basis, which I do agree with you is probably not the best way to budget for technology investments.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that answer. I look forward to working with you on it. Mr. Miller, a big driver of costs associated with legacy IT systems is the need for specialized programmers rather than the more generalized IT and security personnel that can adapt systems as they evolve. This issue speaks to the federal government's workforce challenges more broadly, namely that we are failing to hire and retain a highly skilled workforce to meet agency missions. How will you address the critical need to hire and retain a skilled and diverse federal workforce, especially when it comes to federal IT?
Senator Hassan, thank you for that important question. Not only inside the federal government, but also many contractors have to maintain skills solely for the operation of federal IT systems, as you know well. Technical talent, both in IT and other places, is going to be a critical element of how we think about the federal workforce. And one aspect of that needs to be inspiring more Americans to serve. The public service aspect has brought many technologists into the U.S. government through USDS and other places where we can bring people in and rotate them across agencies to tackle these, but it is a bigger issue than just that, and we need to work with CIOs, make sure we have strong CIOs in agencies, and we're addressing the need and being flexible and creative, and I would look forward to the opportunity to work with you on that.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both for your answers, for your work, and for your willingness to serve. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. The chair recognizes Senator Paul for your questions.
Ms. Young, we face a $27 trillion deficit. We're borrowing a little over $2 million every minute. I mean, that means we'll borrow $50 million, the next 25 minutes. It's just extraordinary where we are. You've been vocal in your support for earmarks. We haven't done earmarks around here for a while when the Republicans were in charge. I think maybe it's important that we review where some of these earmarks have been going in the past. Most people remember the Bridge to Nowhere. This was $400 million on a bridge and road to nowhere. It served about 50 people in Alaska. It was lampooned for years. There was also $350 million we spent on an A3 rocket test stand in a senator's home state. It was completed in 2014, 4 years after the program it was designed to be used for was shuttered. Earmarks don't have a great history in our country. We spent $1 million on a former residence of Thomas Stone, a marginal historical figure who argued for reconciliation with the British, before signing the Declaration of Independence. The house was bought in exchange for a Maryland congressman's vote on a national parks bill. This is what would happen in the past. If they wanted you to vote for something, they say, well, was your grandmother prominent in her community? We'll do grandmother's museum for you. That literally was happening under earmarks. $1 million was spent on exhibits and films for the Woodstock Museum. Now, some of these things got put in, and then someone finally had some sense and took them back out. This one never got built, fortunately. $50 million on a 4.5-acre indoor tropical rainforest in Iowa that was never built, but was stuck in by a senator and then fortunately was removed. This is sort of the history of earmarks. They're sort of the worst of what government represents. And so I'm troubled that this is something you voice support for. There was $22 million put in a secret DOD program to investigate UFO sightings. This was one of Senator Reid's passions. I don't think we have to go further into the discussion of whether or not that's a good use of taxpayer money. $50,000 to the Detroit Institute of Bagels. There's one we really think we need to spend some money on. $90,000 to create audio tours of the National Cowgirl Museum and Hall of Fame. $500,000 to the Teapot Hall of Fame, which closed before construction was completed. $500,000 to travel for high school exchange programs between the Philadelphia and the Virgin Islands. So, I mean, the history of earmarks is not one of our, putting our best foot forward. So I worry that you would go to OMB, and this is a philosophy that you would bring there because you've publicly advocated for these. In the most recent bill, we have $140 million for Congressman Pelosi's a tunnel in her district. We have $1.5 million in it for Senator Schumer for a bridge in his state. So I think that we really need to look long and hard at this. At the peak of earmarking in 2006, members of Congress added nearly 10,000 pet projects costing the taxpayer nearly $29 billion. During a 10-year period, the earmarks rose in 1996 from about 1,000 to 14,000. I think we finally had one transportation bill that had 6,000 earmarks on one transportation bill. And there literally was stuff named after people's grandmothers or somebody prominent in their district. They'd say, oh, we'll do a museum for them. Studies estimated that for every dollar companies spent lobbying, they bought $28 in earmarks. At one point, 60% of the House Armed Services Committee members were channeling earmarks to campaign contributors. When they did a reform and they said you had to put your name and attach your name to the earmark you put on to sort of shame people into this, they found that of the 81 House and Senate appropriators who made up 15% of Congress, they were responsible for 51% of the earmarks and 61% of the money spent. So I guess considering where we are in the debt, I'd like to hear, why you think it would be a good idea to go back to earmarks.
Senator, thank you for the question and opportunity to talk about this issue. The first commentary I have is the Constitution is very clear about who gets to appropriate, and it's Congress out of the three equal branches. So it will be your decision, congressional decision, House and Senate, on how you spend federal dollars. If confirmed, I think it would be my role at OMB to implement what you have passed. So I certainly appreciate any past comments I may have made. I'm a staffer, so I doubt I've made many public comments. As you have staff, our bosses tend to make comments. But I believe there is going to be a lively debate about how you choose as the Constitution dictates. And I certainly hope to be confirmed. And on matters of the budget, If technical assistance is needed, if confirmed at OMB, we will be happy to provide that. But it is Congress's role to spend dollars.
You're right, and Congress will make the decision, not you. Do you favor earmarks? Do you think they're a good idea?
I certainly, Senator, I certainly think the word earmarks has taken on, one definition. I think we earmark now. I think how do you fund the Army Corps or highway projects without earmarking? They're in a place, and they cost money. So there are some federal programs that are earmarks by the very definition of being directed, being in someone's district or state.
I guess the difference is this. So, for example, when Robert Byrd was here, he paved about every inch of West Virginia because he had the power to do it and he'd been here forever. I've got a bridge that's needed to be fixed and had to have repairs, and we had people lined up for 10 miles on either side of it, but I don't think it'd be right for me to fix this one bridge in there ahead of others. I think what would be appropriate is we lay out the rules on which bridges should be fixed. So you're right, Congress has an obligation. We shouldn't just send it to the president, who could then earmark it, which would be a mistake. We should say bridges that have the most traffic, are the oldest, have had the most repairs. We should set the rules for then the Department of Transportation, and then ultimately you'd think the decision would be made by engineers. But that's not the history of earmarks. The history of earmarks is the longer you've been here, the more stuff you get. And it's true on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat. The longer you're here, the more stuff you get under the earmark regime. And there has been a little bit less of that. So, but I think it's a real mistake to advocate for earmarks and to be too blasé about it, because I think, our country really is suffering under a great burden of debt, and OMB has some oversight in that. So being in favor of earmarks to me is not a good thing.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Romney, you are recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, Tom Carper here. Do you know where I am in the queue, please?
Senator Carper, we've got Senator Romney. There are others that are going to be coming that are ahead of Senator Romney that aren't here yet, but you are after him. You're 1, 2, 3, 4 on the list after Senator Romney, but there are 1, 2, 3 that may arrive that are ahead of Senator Romney. So maybe a few. We'll let you know when we're getting close.
Mr. Chairman, I checked in early. Something's wrong with your list. I would just ask that somebody check it, okay? Thank you.
My clerk says that you were not checked in.
Not true. I'll talk to the clerk later.
Yeah, we'll be right back. We'll be back to you offline, Senator Carper.
These Democrats just go at each other tooth and nail. It's amazing.
Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recall during the years of the last administration, particularly before the COVID crisis occurred, that there was a period of great, robust economic growth. And despite that, we were generating nearly $1 trillion a year in deficits, which of course added to the debt. I get a text every morning that tells me what the debt is today. And today, actually yesterday, it went over $28 trillion in national debt. There was a member of the last administration, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said debt is good. When asked, hey, are you concerned about all this debt and the $1 trillion deficits, he said, no, debt's good. Do you believe debt is good at the level we have and at the level we keep adding to it even during good years?
Senator, I would use a different word. Not good, but okay. I think it's manageable. I would never say debt is good, but I think it is okay with the current with interest rates being as low as they are, and the tools the Fed has. I think we remain, thankfully, in a good place to continue to combat the pandemic the way we have.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the pandemic necessarily. I'm talking about the annual deficits we run of roughly $1 trillion. The challenge is, yes, interest rates are low now, but if interest rates go up and we still have the debt, we got to pay the interest. So last year we spent $390 billion in interest. If interest rates go back to their normal level, we'll spend $1 trillion a year in interest, which would overwhelm our federal budget. I'm concerned in the COVID relief plan that the President, by the way, I fully support helping people that need help, helping states and businesses that need help. I'm concerned that in the current plan there's a lot of excess that is going to just add to the debt without creating a benefit to our economy or helping people that are in need. I'm concerned, for instance, that under the plan, many states that had no revenue loss or no deficit as a result of COVID and no unreimbursed COVID expenses, that they nonetheless are going to get billions and billions of dollars. I see that as a problem. Do you feel that's a problem as well?
Senator, I've always looked at, and I've worked on the Coronavirus Relief Fund. We did $160 billion in bipartisan CARES bill. That money ran out in December. I've always looked at that fund as not just a revenue loss fund, but one that is meant to and designed to provide fiscal relief. So those states who are doing increased vaccine distribution, they have increased costs. This fund is also to ensure that they provide needed services. So I've looked beyond revenue loss as one of the agencies.
Oh, of course. What I'm saying is, if a state had no net revenue loss, we had 21 states that revenue has gone up every year, even during the pandemic. 21 revenues have gone up, and we have reimbursed all their excess COVID expenses, and we raised the FMAP, so we provided greater support for their Medicaid. So these are states that are in fine financial shape. California, for instance, I understand their budget surplus this year is roughly $20 billion. And yet, under the president's plan, we anticipating giving California another $27 billion. That doesn't make sense to me. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, sir. If you consider the regular budget did not account for a pandemic, so if we want states to step in and do a lot of these COVID relief activities.
Well, but all the COVID relief activities were reimbursed through the CARES Act, and anything not reimbursed is appropriately to be reimbursed. So I'm saying if the federal government agrees to provide all the funding necessary to reimburse COVID expenses that a state has, and it fills their budget gap from loss of revenue, I don't see a reason to give even more money to that state. I hope you'll look at that. I think
I'm happy to, sir. And we've certainly talked about bipartisanship. This is one, certainly some of the governors and locals of both parties have given us data that says they are not just in need because of revenue loss, but because of the extra requirements for their citizens due to COVID.
I can assure you, as a former governor, if the federal government is going to be handing out billions of dollars, I'm going to have my hand out to get as much as I can. But these are dollars that are going to be paid for by our kids and our grandkids. They're being loaned to us by the Chinese, among others. We have to be really careful in what we send out. And what is being proposed under the president's plan is really not in line with what the actual results are that are being seen by states, because states are continuing to receive revenue. They receive revenue from income tax, from property taxes at the local level, of course, and so states are not seeing the kind of pain that some states are. The states that feel pain, got to help them. The states that don't feel pain, we shouldn't be sending them billions of dollars that we're borrowing for our kids to have to pay back. On a different topic, on our trust funds, we got a lot of trust funds in trouble, as you know. The Highway Trust Fund runs out of money this year. Medicare's Hospital Insurance Trust Fund runs out in 2024. Social Security Disability Trust Fund 2026. Social Security Retirement Fund in 2031. In December, 71 senators voted for an amendment to the budget resolution on the importance of extending the solvency of these trust funds, one by one. It specifically called for creating individual bipartisan, bicameral subcommittees to look at each one of those trust funds and find a bipartisan solution to get each one of those on a solvent basis. Is this effort one that you are willing to support and work with as we proceed?
Senator, I think that's the only way we're going to find solutions is through a bipartisan one where Congress works together and the administration works in partnership. So you absolutely have my commitment to support such an effort.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, what consulting firm did you work with?
The Boston Consulting Group.
Oh, the Boston Consulting Group. I worked there once too. Very fine group. Smart people. I hope you bring some of that skill and capability to the new assignment you have. Can you tell me precisely what are the responsibilities in the assignment you would receive? What are the key deliverables that you have in the assignment that you were looking to be confirmed to?
Senator Romney, thank you for the question. As I understand it, the Deputy Director for Management, which was created in 1990 by the CFO Act, both to look at federal financial management at a time when it was quite poor across agencies, as well as look at a broad set of general management functions, is to play the central OMB role of ensuring that, one, agencies are delivering on their missions through clear and consistent policy and guidance on execution performance, that, two, we have the right policies in place working with OPM on the federal workforce, that we're looking at our technology systems, and both from a cybersecurity standpoint and from a delivery standpoint, and that our procurement policy is consistent with both mission of the agencies as well as the broad set of policy goals, such as supporting small and disadvantaged businesses, strengthening the American workforce through domestic preference requirements, and more broadly serving as one of the leaders of OMB overall to support all of OMB's broad missions.
I look forward to hearing a report on your success in carrying out those responsibilities. I also solicit your involvement in our effort to rein in the excesses in government, and particularly for us to tame the debt. As a guy who was once in the world of leveraged buyouts, I understand the value of debt and how you can use debt effectively, but I'm concerned that the amount of debt we're adding to the country, even during good times, puts us in peril down the road. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Senator Rosen joining virtually.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both witnesses for being nominees, for being here today, for your willingness to serve our country, and really appreciate it. And so I want to talk a little bit about nuclear testing, because in 1982, Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which was amended later to select a national and permanent geologic repository in Nevada for the nation's nuclear waste. However, because of funding shortfalls and strong, needless to say, strong local opposition, there thankfully still is no nuclear repository at Yucca Mountain. It's a fight that my colleagues and I in the Nevada congressional delegation and I have to have year after year. So this committee just had a hearing earlier this week on reducing fraud, waste, and mismanagement across federal government and to push to revive the failed Yucca Mountain project. Well, it's a prime example of potential government waste. My Jobs Not Waste Act would provide Secretary of Energy from taking any action related to the licensing, planning, development, or construction of a nuclear waste repository at Yucca Mountain until two things happen. Number one, the director of OMB submits a study to Congress on the economic viability and job-creating benefits of alternative uses of the Yucca Mountain site. And two, Congress holds a hearing on the economic benefits to an alternative use of Yucca Mountain site. So OMB, you drive executive branch policies and priorities, so naturally your office is going to have a large role in this and reviewing these in the future. So Ms. Young, I'd like you to respond to a couple of questions. If confirmed, will you pledge to not fund licensing, construction, or nuclear waste storage at the Yucca Mountain site consistent with recent pledges made by Energy Secretary Granholm and consistent with President Biden's commitments?
Senator Rosen, I certainly, from my current role in the Appropriations Committee, appreciate that we will be guided by congressional budgets that come. So certainly I commit to you to working on this issue. I understand the intense, I don't want to get this wrong, but I've worked with your colleagues in the House on this, and I understand the local issues that come with this. But you certainly have my commitment that we need to take a look at this very important issue and probably take a pause, but we also will be guided by what Congress sends us back in the budget.
But building on that, will you commit to working with me and the Nevada delegation to explore alternatives for the Yucca Mountain site? I have a lot of ideas of how we can actually use it for national safety and security as opposed to a nuclear repository.
You have my commitment to work with you on that issue and on the issue writ large of nuclear waste. It's very clear that it's going to take an approach that OMB's, and I hope to be a part of, working with you and your colleagues and the rest of Congress to find a comprehensive solution to nuclear waste. So you have my commitment on looking at alternative uses and also on the issue of nuclear waste writ large.
Thank you. I'd like to actually talk a little bit about rural Nevada because, Ms. Young, you wrote so movingly in your testimony about growing up in Clinton, Louisiana, a rural town of about 2,000 people when you lived there. So my home state of Nevada has many vibrant rural communities, frontier communities. We're the most mountainous state in the lower 48. But they're facing challenges as a result of COVID-19. So I'd love to get your perspective on how we can help lift up and empower rural Americans. So how is that growing up in rural America? How has it shaped your perspective in government, and how does it relate to you investing in our rural communities?
Senator, it is very difficult when growing up in a small town to explain to those, I live in Washington, D.C. now, but it's very difficult to really comprehend unless you grew up there how difficult it is given the lack of access to even, cultural institutions. Sometimes depending, you have to travel for education. I was born 2 towns over, so hospitals. So it is hard to quantify sometimes how difficult it is to get a leg up coming from rural communities. I think one thing we heard a lot of this year from the coronavirus perspective is, we just talked about state and local funding, is we gave in the CARES Act funding to states in large metropolitan areas, $500,000 or more. There's an outcry from mayors of smaller towns that they didn't see those resources trickle down. So I certainly appreciate the effort Congress is taking now to make sure smaller areas are beneficiaries of these direct payments because they have costs without a lot of tax base.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I really want to discuss critical rural health care issues. Just like you mentioned, we want to ensure that there's a clear and equitable process for our graduate medical education slots to be distributed in the areas that need them the most and address those provider shortages, particularly in our rural areas. So how do you think OMB can help us with that?
Senator, I'm happy to work with you in your office on specific concerns. Those are ones, again, unless you've grown up there, it's hard to imagine not having access to, adequate care, sometimes no care, and having to travel in cases of emergency. And I know residencies and graduate medical education can fill some of those holes. So I will happily commit to you to working on this issue with HHS, and certainly as OMB has a coordinating role on most things. We'll certainly work with you on that.
Thank you. I know my time's about to expire, so you can respond to my question off the record or on the record in writing, but I really want to talk about how we prioritize modernizing our IT systems. We've seen during COVID, whether it's unemployment or so many other of our IT systems that are the platforms for what we need to do. They are not nimble enough. They're not robust enough. And I'd love to have that conversation with you about IT modernization, but my time's expired, so we'll have to save that conversation.
I'd love to
later.
continue talking to you about it, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next in the queue is Senator Scott. I don't see Senator Scott in the hearing room. Are we joining virtually? Senator Scott going once, going twice. We'll come back to him when he joins. Senator Hawley would be next. Also not in the hearing room. Are we virtual? Senator Hawley, going once, going twice. We'll come back to him. Then it comes to me, followed by Senator Johnson, who's waiting, and Lankford after that. So a couple items I wanted to touch on with both of you. In prior hearings to your counterpart nominees, I've had a chance to ask questions generally about equity. And using the budget together with policy to advance equity. We've touched on what it means in the COVID context, in the climate change and environmental justice context, in the context of housing and homelessness and others. So the question actually I wanted to prioritize for today is one that speaks more towards management and leadership. We know that after years of persistent attacks on federal employees and public employees more broadly, during the last administration, we faced significant challenges in the recruitment and retention of a talented federal workforce, and especially a diverse, talented federal workforce. The federal government seems to be falling behind in the hiring of the workforce for tomorrow. A year ago, only 7.3% of the federal workforce was under the age of 30, compared to 23% in the private sector. Add to that the recognition, both by number and percentage of federal employees, particularly at the senior levels, upper management and leadership, that are eligible to retire in the next decade. Right? It begs the question, are we prepared to do the proper succession planning to maintain that continuity of leadership throughout federal government? And coupled with that, the need to promote diversity. It seems to remain an obstacle across the federal workforce. People of color are overrepresented in entry-level positions, but severely underrepresented in senior-level and career senior executive service positions. Federal agencies must take meaningful, proactive steps to recruit the workforce of the future while promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, question for both, for you, Ms. Young, and for Mr. Miller. What can we do? What ideas and commitments can you commit to leverage the funding process to improve the recruitment of a young, diverse cohort of professionals? And also, what can we do to further strengthen the morale of our current workforce to help on the retention side of things?
Senator Padilla.
Mr. Miller.
Thank you for the question and commend you for focusing on this issue. Successful organizations require talented, diverse, highly engaged teams. The data shows that repeatedly. When we look at the federal government, as you noted at the end of your comments, the engagement levels, the morale levels are not where they should be. The opportunity to serve our country is a privilege, and the federal workforce is filled with dedicated, talented individuals, and we need to empower them to fully do their jobs. First, I think you noted this, but we do need to broaden the sources of recruitment into the federal government, including by inspiring more people to serve. This includes a focus on diversity and inclusion. It also includes a focus on technical talent. We need to look at any bottlenecks in the system to bring people in, and it's something that in my role, if confirmed as Deputy Director for Management, I would be willing to work with you and excited to work with you and members of this committee on, work closely with OPM, with the CHICO Council, the Chief Human Capital Officers Council across federal agencies, to make sure we're empowering, lifting up, engaging with, and skilling our federal workforce for our needs today and tomorrow.
Okay. Ms. Young?
I'd like to add, I agree with everything Jason has stated. From my experience, I started the government as a presidential management fellow. I was lucky to find a brochure in a dean's office in New Orleans. Turns out, if you were on the East Coast and in school, you know all about this program, not so much from other parts of the country. I think we have to do a better job of where we recruit around the country. I think people will travel, they will serve their country, they just don't know a lot of opportunities exist. I think we can go to community colleges. We need to expand where we go look for talent and do a better job. And we certainly need to do it in these areas we are having trouble recruiting in the technology place. Not everything is about money, and I think people are motivated to serve their government, but we certainly can't create hurdles. And we've heard, I've experienced it where you go look for a job on USA Jobs, and it's not the easiest to do. So I think we need to, as Jason said, remove hurdles from serving in addition to improving our recruitment processes.
Okay. Thank you both for that. With the less than 2 minutes I have left, I wanted to tee up another question, allow for you, both of you to respond to a dynamic that was raised earlier in the hearing, and that is the wisdom or strategy behind supporting states at this time when some seem to be hurting more than others by the COVID-19 pandemic from an economic impact standpoint, and some states experiencing what in my view is a false surplus. I can speak to California, my home state, but I imagine others that made significant mid-year cuts in the 2019-2020 fiscal year at the outset of the pandemic, and adopting 2020-2021 fiscal year budgets that were frankly doomsday budgets, not knowing the depths of the recession. Some states have been buoyed by incredible performance in the stock market, right? Wall Street record highs, Dow Jones record highs, while at the same time I see record lines at food banks and COVID testing sites. So can you just speak to some of the dynamics that you would take into consideration as we act on the wisdom of supporting states at this difficult time?
Thank you, Senator. You're absolutely right. There are some states who saw this coming, took some drastic steps, but we certainly cannot use those baselines. There has to be an explanation why there are certain people being overly left behind in this pandemic, and state budgets. They have to balance. I appreciate the difficulties where the federal government, I think, can serve a role here, is to ensure that basic state functions can be brought up, and there are some populations that require more services during the pandemic, or we're going to have more of a wealth gap in this country. So more investments are needed. I look at the homeless, the needs of the homeless. I don't think anyone can argue that we were doing too much or enough to fix the homeless situation. Maybe we should use the COVID pandemic to do better. And we saw that population was at more risk. We didn't have a great handle before the pandemic. So there's some areas, especially with communities who were already behind in the pandemic. We need to ensure that state services not only stay the same, but we do better.
So, thank you, Ms. Young. Mr. Miller, I see you eager to jump in. In the interest of time, let me just say that it'll be an ongoing conversation. In closing, let me just acknowledge that some of the cuts, drastic actions taken by states included deep cuts to the social safety net, number one, but also to state employees, both staffing levels as well as wages and salaries. So that's not lost on me, and to the extent that we can help restore those baseline of services, I think that would serve us well. Next is Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would just quick comment before I hop into my plan questions is that we certainly have not done a very good job targeting what relief we've already authorized, the $4 trillion. I really don't know how much of that is still left unspent. We're hearing reports somewhere around $1 trillion. So we haven't done a very good job targeting it. Do either of you deny, by the way, first of all, thank you for your previous service in government. Thank you for your willingness to serve in this capacity. Do either of you dispute some of the economic figures I'm reading about that per capita real disposable income is up 5.5% in 2020, that total savings is up $1.6 trillion, that the bottom 20 percentile of wage earners, the bottom 20%, on average receive $45,000 in some kind of transfer payment from somewhere around 100 different transfer programs as well as tax credits? I mean, either of you dispute those numbers? Ms. Young? Mr. Miller?
I don't dispute them. I'm not familiar with the specifics.
So again, I know people are in need. I think what we should be doing is taking a look at targeting what we've already authorized. When you've literally got somewhere around $1 trillion not yet spent, something that's not even obligated, before we go rush off and try and pass another $1.9 trillion, adding to our $28 trillion in debt, just seems more prudent to kind of take a look back, what worked, what didn't work so well, and target it to those who truly need it. Let me just ask, one of the efforts of this committee, twice we passed something called the GOOD Act, Guidance Out of Darkness Act. I was very disappointed to see that President Biden, in one of his first executive orders, suspended that. Now, I'm hoping you both understand what that is, but let me quick describe it. All it asks agencies to do is, when they issue guidance on top of rules, regulations, and laws, the guidance that actually affects the business community and people's lives, that they publish what that guidance is. But if they rescind a guidance, they take it off their website. Why in the world would the Biden administration rescind such a common sense, good government transparency effort? Ms. Young.
Senator Johnson, you I'm sure understand I have not been at the agency and a part of the administration, but you have my commitment to, work with you and your staff to figure out, clearly transparency has to be, that is a central government tenet for the people to trust its government. So I'm happy to look into what the decision was behind that and work with you and your staff on some of the particulars and any concerns the administration had when making that decision.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think we literally passed it out of this committee under my chairmanship twice. I think unanimous bipartisan support. I could be wrong on that, but again, we passed it twice, strong bipartisan support. So, Mr. Miller, we also make the same commitment to look into this and hopefully encourage the Biden administration to publish guidance documents and just basic guidance?
I share Ms. Young's commitment, and the general principle of guidance being transparent and readily accessible is the right one.
Okay. I really want to come down here, not only get that commitment, but just get commitment from OMB to provide Congress information. I really thought the Trump administration was pretty transparent and certainly provided this senator, I think Congress in general, because there were reports they issued. For example, the details on what was spent of the $4 trillion that we had already authorized. One example of that is as we were considering the fourth COVID relief package before the August recess, because of the information OMB provided, I was able to provide my colleagues the fact that at that point in time there was $1.2 trillion that was unspent, and much of that was unobligated. So that certainly changed the debate within our conference. In the end, the result was within the Republican targeted bill, $350 billion of that, I think it was about $600 billion targeted bill, was repurposed from the previous bills, which to me makes sense. We all knew we had to do something fast, we had to do something massive, we knew it was going to be far from perfect, and so again, that's just good governance is you do oversight, you take a look back and go, okay, well, that didn't work out the way we planned. Let's target it better. In the most recent package actually passed in December, the $900 billion, again, because that information we had from OMB, $600 billion of the $900 billion package that passed was repurposed. So in other words, don't let that money sit out there unspent and probably be poorly spent because it's not properly directed, properly targeted. Let's repurpose it. Let's do a better job. So now here we sit, about ready to go on the floor of the Senate and debate, barely debate, a $1.9 trillion bill. By the way, I was on the Senate floor yesterday. There are a number of analogies to highlight what $1 trillion is. My wife has one in terms of time. If I give you $1 every second, it takes 11.7 days, 11.6 days to give you $1 million. It takes almost 32 years to give you $1 billion. It takes 32,000 years to give you $1 trillion. But I think the even better one is the volume one. A dollar bill is 4.3 thousandths of an inch thick. If you stack $1.9 trillion on top of each other, it's over 130,000 miles. That's more than halfway to the moon. That's what we're talking about passing with a couple days of debate. So one of the problems I have in providing relevant and effective amendments is I don't know how much of the $4 trillion is unspent and unobligated to be able to craft my amendments effectively to hopefully do a better job. I mean, I would hope that in this deliberative process that I'm going to force on the Senate, vote-a-rama is supposed to be unlimited debate, unlimited amendments. I'm going to hold us to that unlimited amendment pledge so we can carefully consider just about every line item of this $1.9 trillion spending behemoth. But it'd be very helpful if the Biden administration's OMB would provide Congress, all of us, exactly how much has been spent, what is unspent, and what is unobligated. So I'll just quick ask both of you, I'm running out of time. If you're confirmed these positions, will you utilize your position OMB to be transparent and provide Congress with this type of information that we're going to need moving forward? Because I got a feeling this isn't going to be the last time we're considering some massive spending bill. Ms. Young.
I've been in your seat where we have not gotten the information we needed to make critical decisions on the Appropriations Committee, so you certainly have my commitment to providing that type of information to both sides of the aisle.
Mr. Miller.
You also have my commitment, Senator, to provide transparent, timely information.
So just to close, I've been using an example of 1993. There was a supplemental appropriation bill, about $19.5 billion introduced by the Clinton administration. The Senate deliberated, debated that for 12 days. 12 days. What we're considering now is 100 times larger than that, but because of that deliberative process, they whittled that $19.5 billion package. Again, we're talking about $1,900 billion. They whittled that down to $4 billion, and then it passed unanimously because it was a bipartisan effort. So I hope that's going to be the result of a more deliberative process over the course of hopefully many days. Again, we took 12 days to debate $19.5 billion, finally whittled down to $4. That would be, from my standpoint, far more acceptable result than just blowing this thing out here in a couple days. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We have a number of members that are in process of getting here. It's a busy day. People are running back and forth. Senator Carper, I see you're checked in. If you're available, we can recognize you for your question, Senator Carper.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Senator Carper. I can hear you.
All right.
I can't see you right now.
There we go.
We can hear you, we just can't see you.
Can you see me now?
We can hear you if you want to go ahead. There you are. Senator Carper, welcome.
My apologies to the WHO. Gary, can you see me? Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
I can hear you, we can see you. You have the floor.
That's good. Yeah, thanks so much. Welcome to our nominees. We're delighted that you're before us, and thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you for the time that you spent with me earlier this week and with my staff. Since June of last year, GAO has published about five or six reports examining the implementation of the CARES Act, a number of the programs there, and providing recommendations to a bunch of federal agencies to try to improve their response efforts. As of January, about a month ago, the end of January, I'm told that 27 out of GAO's 31 recommendations remain unimplemented. I'll say that again. At the end of this past January, like barely a month ago, 27 of GAO's 31 recommendations remain unimplemented. In its January report, GAO commented that it was deeply troubled, that's the quote, deeply troubled by the lack of sufficient federal action on critical gaps identified and by lack of clear plans to address these gaps. That's a quote from GAO in the January report. Ms. Young and Mr. Miller, you'll each recall that when my staff and I had talked with you, we talked about how do we develop some synergy with respect to spending taxpayer dollars more wisely. We have GAO out there to try to make sure that we're not wasting money. They produce a GAO high-risk list every 2 years at the beginning of the Congress. They just unveiled the latest high-risk list. And we've actually made some progress in some of those aspects. But it's very substantial. But if we somehow have a situation where GAO is doing their job, trying to make sure we're spending money wisely, and we have OMB doing the same kind of thing, different ways, but in a complementary way. We have the Inspector Generals. Every agency of any consequence has an Inspector General whose job is to help ferret out waste, among other things. We have this committee that we serve on, an oversight function. We can all be pulling our fortunes together and pulling together. We can actually make some progress. Given the growth in our federal deficit and the coming growth, the further growth in that deficit in the days ahead, we need all the synergy we can get. So, question. Ms. Young, Mr. Miller, can you each take a moment to discuss the role OMB plays in ensuring agencies work with GAO to implement some of the recommendations that I just alluded to? And how important is it for OMB to lead by example here, and what actions would you take to improve response efforts from the various agencies? And I'm going to ask if we could, Ms. Young, would you go first, and just lead us off, please.
Senator Carper, thank you so much, and it was a pleasure speaking with you about this issue and others privately.
Please to learn your middle name is forever.
I was going to thank you for not revealing my middle name to the Senate, but I think OMB can serve a critical role in issuing guidance to agencies to ensure that they understand responding to GAO recommendations. You know, GAO offers an opportunity for agencies to dispute things and provide their set of facts if they disagree with recommendations, and they should do that. But where there are legitimate things that the agency freely admits needs to be improved, I also think Congress serves a central role in their, you know, this committee being central. And I certainly remember my time on the Appropriations Committee, having GAO come up first in a panel and having agencies come up second and seeing where the truth was in the middle to make sure these agencies were being responsive. On the other side, I think OMB can be brought to bear. One, as you mentioned, leading by example, providing information to GAO, and also, again, issuing guidance and setting expectations. And when GAO has those issues, I know they talk to the committees like this one. OMB should also be a place that helps GAO break those log jams with agencies when they aren't getting information.
All right, thank you for that response. Mr. Miller, could you respond? And I'm going to ask you to be fairly brief and crisp because I have one more question. Go ahead, Mr. Miller, please.
Absolutely. Senator Carper, thank you for that question. And I know the Comptroller General was in front of this committee a couple of days ago talking about the 2021 high-risk list. As I understand it, past practice from some individuals who served as Deputy Director for Management was to work closely with the Comptroller General on each of the items on the high-risk list, convening agency leaders to make sure there was ongoing progress against them. There are two in particular that pertain to OMB, cybersecurity and strategic human capital management, and I would expect that if confirmed, I would work with GAO, with OMB, and with agencies to make sure that we're making progress against that.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. In our conversation a couple of days ago, I mentioned that I think under both Democratic and Republican administrations in the past, there used to be, and I think you all may just allude to this, but there used to be regular meetings with folks from the administration, the relevant agency, with GAO and agency leaders to review high-risk areas and to monitor progress in investment program vulnerabilities. And over the past several years, these regular meetings have stopped occurring, involving OMB, involving GAO, and some of the agencies. And I would just ask for both of you, do you intend to restore this practice of regular meetings with GAO and agencies? Ms. Young?
Yes, Senator. I had a bit of a hard time hearing. There was a loud buzz, but you have my commitment. Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Absolutely. I think that's a critical role for OMB and GAO to play together.
Okay, thank you. There used to be a guy named Willie Sutton who was a bank robber back in the Great Depression, and he robbed a lot of banks. He finally got captured and caught and put in jail and brought to trial, and it was before the judge, and back in those days. And the judge said to him, Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks? And Mr. Sutton replied famously, said, that's where the money is. And in terms of where we're wasting a lot of money in federal government misspending, is with respect to improper payments. We've just adopted bipartisan support in the last Congress, I think with the support of the ranking member, with support of the chair of the committees and others, legislation to actually get serious with respect to improper payments. Why is that important? I think they've totaled nearly $1.7 trillion government-wide from fiscal 2003 to 2019. 1.7 trillion. That's almost the size of this package that we're about to consider on the floor for the pandemic. But I understand that OMB has begun implementation of what we passed a year or so ago, the Payment Integrity Information Act, a law that we all challenges I mentioned, which is intended to help cut down on improper payments. And this is my question. It's an easy one. Mr. Young, Ms. Young, Mr. Miller, could each of you describe, just very briefly, your approach to the issue of improper payments As Deputy Director and Deputy Director for Management, how would you lead government-wide efforts to address payment integrity issues and curb improper payments? Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Young.
Thank you, sir. I know we're out of time, but I talked about this earlier. I think one issue OMB can help in is improving our data sources when it comes to improper payments. Some of the issues, I know fraud is huge, but also if we don't have systems that track correctly, we're never going to fix this issue.
So thanks, Mr. Miller, please.
And Senator Carper, commend you and the committee for your work on this issue. As I understand it, the OMB team is working on guidance, as you noted, regarding improper payments to implement the Payment Integrity and Improvement Act. And if confirmed, I would look forward to the opportunity to work with you and the committee on making sure that the execution is consistent with the intent of the law that was passed.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, as you know, my wife, Martha, complains sometimes to me about spending too much time focusing on the Postal Service. And she's very focused on the Postal Service, and I say that it's important. And she keeps asking me what I want on my tombstone when I die. And I say, honey, I'm fine. I'm part of the guy. She says, well, what do you want? And I told her the other day, I said, how about return to sender? How about return to sender? And given the focus I've had on improper payments, if that doesn't work out, I wanted to say he was death on improper payments. And we talked about 1.7 trillion between 2003 and today. We need to be serious about it. Deadly serious. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Langford, you are recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thanks to both of you.
Happy birthday, Senator Langford. Happy birthday, Senator Langford.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks to both of you for going through the process on this. It's not a fun process to be able to go through, but thanks for doing it. Ms. Young, I have to tell you, you have a great reputation among the staff that's here on the appropriations staff. So thanks for the dedication of the work. I've got about 50 questions that I want to try to run through on this that we'll run out of time on, I'm sure. Yesterday, sitting in that same seat was Gene Dodaro from GAO, who you know well. We were talking about multiple things, but one of them was a bill that we've worked on a bipartisan basis for years called the Taxpayer's Right to Know. His statement on that bill that I have worked on for a decade, literally, to get passed, it brings a lot of information out so the public can see how we manage things, what's in each agency, what's a program. Gene Dodaro's been a big advocate for that from GAO, saying we need that. In fact, last year he said this is the top priority for GAO to be able to help them in their work. His statement yesterday was this is all going to matter on the implementation from OMB. Are you familiar with the Taxpayer's Right to Know, and are you committing to be able to actually implement that bill so we'll actually get the information we need?
I commit to implementing and working with you. I know you've been a leader here, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that very much. Senator Hassan and I have worked on trying to get to a solution of government shutdowns. You've mentioned that several times. What a pain that is and how awful that is for every agency, for every government office, for every federal family member that's out there. It's a terrible process. So there have been lots of solutions out there. How do we end government shutdowns? There's not been one that's stuck. So she and I worked together starting 2 years ago to try to get a bipartisan solution for how do we solve this that we can all agree to, and then we built quite a coalition on that. The basics of it is that we get to the end of the fiscal year, if we don't have the appropriation bills done, we'd have an automatic CR, but none of us can travel. OMB would be locked in, they couldn't travel, we couldn't travel, our staff couldn't travel. We're all locked in together, and we're in a quorum call every day until we get our work done. It focuses on getting the appropriation bills done. That's the key. When the appropriation bills are done, we can move on to other things. When we're not done, we're stuck doing those. But it protects federal workers. It protects all of our agencies, so we don't have the chaos of government shutdown. Would you be willing to support something like that, implement that, help us to be able to think through how we can get that done?
I mean, I'm usually locked in place in times like this, so I'm happy.
You're already there?
Yeah, I'm happy to be locked in with you. So I'm committed. Look, something has to give, and I'm committed. If you have if you'd like to invite me to any of these discussions, I certainly have lots of ideas and would love to work with you on this.
Great, because we've got to solve this, and Senator Hassan and I have worked on this a long time. This is not a partisan solution. It's a problem that's out there we've got to be able to resolve, and it's an embarrassment for us as a nation on the world stage. OMB has been traditionally a black box when we start dealing with things like decisions on Corps of Engineers priorities. Corps of Engineers will set a list of priorities. Here are the things that need to be done. Here are the highest risk. They'll give those to OMB, no matter who's president. they disappear, and the list seems to get shuffled at some point between Corps of Engineers and OMB and the actual public. As Senator Paul has talked about before, that's why earmarks get pressed so much, because everyone gets so frustrated, because when we set what are the priorities and let's make sure we're doing federal priorities, then those aren't actually done based on an administration's priorities rather than the actual federal priorities. It's a problem. Can you help us open the black box of decision-making in OMB and to be able to say, when we set federal priorities and they're set by the rules, those actually come out as the projects that are actually done?
I've never heard more complaints from bipartisan members than what happens at OMB with the Army Corps list. So you have my commitment to working on that, and I know Army Corps provides that information, and something happens that I don't have insight into as well. So
Because it's a black box to you as well on the outside.
It has, I've been sitting on this
Right.
side, and it is, we provide the funding, we haven't earmarked, something has not been on the level. That information just changes by the time it gets to OMB.
So the hope is that once you get into the machine, you help us open the machine rather than say it was a good idea to keep it closed. Because
people I consider friends will never speak to me again. So I think transparency is necessary.
We'll hold you to that in the days ahead. One of the challenges that we have as well is on reprogramming funds. This has come up several times in the COVID bill. Currently, Congress is debating at some point we're supposed to get text. We've not seen the text yet and don't know when the text is coming, but we understand there's a $1.9 trillion bill coming. We've had a challenge trying to get things like vaccinations and testing amounts. What's still left over from the previous times? Because we understand there's tens of billions of dollars about to be requested for more, when it looks like there's still tens of billions of dollars left over from previous bills just on vaccines, testing, distribution, all of those things. But we can't get accurate numbers on it. My question is really twofold. How do we get accurate numbers rapidly for what's actually been spent, not just allocated? And then the second portion of it is what is your opinion about reprogramming funds? Because there is some concern that what this bill really is an opportunity to give tens of billions of dollars to the administration, and they can say, oops, we're already paid up, but thank you for those tens of billions of dollars. We're going to reprogram it for something very different in that amount.
One, you have my commitment to, and I made it earlier to Senator Johnson, you should have that kind of information. You needed to do your job. So if confirmed, you have my commitment that you'll have that, because we should know what we're spending, and Congress needs that information. On reprogramming, we have to follow the law. I know you know as an appropriator, we have underlying transfer authority and reprogramming in the regular appropriations bills. I doubt most of that authority applies to the reconciliation bill. So we're going to have to read that closely, and I think we'll be bound by those limitations in the law. We can't do anything the transfer authority does not explicitly say we can do and come back to Congress and let you know what we've done.
Great. We'll walk through that in the days ahead on this. Telework is an area that Senator Sinema and I have worked on a lot. There are lots of agencies that if you went back 2 years ago and you asked them how many employees could telework, they would tell you 12%. Until this year when 85% was actually teleworking. We've learned a lot in this year. The question that we're asking, that I'm asking you specifically about, is about remote work and telework. Telework assumes you're going to come into the office at times. We haven't teleworked in a year, we've remote worked, where they haven't come in the office at all. And a lot of agencies have learned we can't do that. So my question is, there's a benefit for the spouses of active duty military that get transferred all over the country all the time. Federal workers that they work in remote areas, that their spouse has a difficult getting a job. For those individuals and multitude thousands and more to work in the federal workforce and to be remote workers. They're not expected to ever come in, but they can work for agencies no matter where they get transferred to with their spouse or with their families. Would you commit to working with Senator Sinema and I to talk more about remote work as a possibility and writing into the job listing itself that this job could be done by remote? So someone locally could get it, or someone anywhere could get this same job. It's a United States citizen.
Senator, I certainly hope we use these lessons from COVID to make systemic changes, and that being one of them. My entire staff on the Appropriations Committee wrote 5 bills from home, and I think they did a great job doing it. So we've proven it works.
Yeah, it can be done. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here. Congratulations on your nominations. Mr. Miller, let me start with you. I put this question to Neera Tanden when she was before the committee a few weeks ago, and I want to ask you because I think it's appropriate here. It's a broad question about policy priorities. Do you think that the big tech companies and Wall Street firms have too much influence in our government and society right now?
Yes, I agree with that, and I think the data bears out that there's too much concentration as well in our economy.
I'm glad to hear you say that. What about a company like Amazon? Do you think Amazon has too much power?
I think broadly, there's a number of large companies that have too much power and in some cases too much influence.
I'm glad to hear you say that too. I asked you about Amazon because I understand that the Greater Washington Partnership, which you led as CEO for 3 years from 2017 to 2020, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the organizations that was in the front of trying to attract Amazon to the Washington, D.C. area. Why do you think Amazon, of course, did ultimately choose the D.C. area as a place for one of its expanded headquarters? Do you think that the proximity to Congress had anything to do with that?
Well, that's correct. I was, in my role as the CEO of the Greater Washington Partnership, supportive of creating new jobs in the area as a relatively slow growth region, despite lots of strong assets, and bringing that kind of talent into the region was a huge benefit.
I've got here a report that maybe you've seen from Mother Jones magazine. Amazon has become a prime revolving door destination in Washington. It extensively details the extent to which the company has established this revolving door by doing things like hiring 247 government officials in the last 10 years. That's on top of $20 million Amazon spent on lobbying activities just in 2020. Now, you've never been employed by Amazon, right?
Correct.
But I'd like to know, what do you think about this revolving door that Mother Jones and others have reported on in our government between these mega corporations? Do you think that's a problem? Do you think it has a negative impact on our public policy?
I haven't seen all the specifics of that report. When I left public service previously, I had the opportunity to go in the private sector and chose to help run a nonprofit on behalf of this region, and as I understand it, the Biden administration has a very strong and robust standard by which it's going to hold all of its appointees to regarding both conduct while in office as well as after.
So you do think that the revolving door, that is a problem, having a revolving door between these major corporations, as you said to me a second ago, you thought had too much power, and government officials, that's a problem?
I think it's appropriate for the administration to take clear and consistent guidelines to its appointees so that there's trust in government.
Mr. Miller, could you pull the microphone just a little closer to your mouth, please?
Let me ask you about that trust in government. Your written testimony, you write similarly that successful delivery is built on 3 pillars, and one of those is a system for measurement and accountability, which I agree with. If you're confirmed, how will you work to ensure that companies like Amazon and others that have such incredible power and market concentration, how will you work to ensure that they don't unduly influence government policy, whether it's through the revolving door, whether it's through lobbying or other means of influence?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think it's important that agencies are putting forward clear, in their strategic plans, clear priorities with measures associated with those. Transparency associated with, are they delivering on those measures? If not, why not? Part of what I would see as my role, if confirmed as Deputy Director for Management, is to work closely with agency leadership to put in place clear agency priorities with smart, clear metrics associated with them and hold them accountable to deliver on it.
Very good. Will you commit to us here that you'll work to ensure that, if confirmed, you'll work to ensure that OMB serves the American public first and not Amazon or Google or Wall Street Bank or any of these mega corporations?
Senator, I absolutely commit to OMB serving the American public first and foremost.
Great. Thank you for that. Ms. Young, in my time remaining, let me just ask you a couple of questions. You will be involved as Deputy Director, if you're confirmed, in decisions that surround the obligation of congressionally appropriated funds. Do you believe that religious organizations are entitled to compete on equal footing with other secular organizations for federal funding that's used to support government programs?
Senator Hawley, you know, all of these programs are guided by their own authorization, so whatever Congress has decided to authorize and pass into law, we will follow the law.
Very good. The former director of OMB issued a memorandum last year which ensured that federal agencies do not discriminate against faith-based organizations when it comes to federal grants, and in fact that they take steps to prevent states from doing so. This is a big deal because if the federal government does everything right, some states can still discriminate against religious institutions on the basis of their faith-based nature. That would be a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. If you're confirmed, can religious institutions count on you to ensure that you will work to prevent either the federal government or states from discriminating on the basis of faith?
Senator Hawley, I think the goal of the American government for the American people is discrimination should have no place, period, in our government. So you certainly have my commitment that I will work towards that goal, which is inherent in a free democracy.
Including discrimination on the basis of faith?
I certainly believe that is one of the tenets. We do not discriminate on the basis of faith.
Very good. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ossoff, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the nominees and welcome. I'd like to ask you a question, please, Ms. Young, about corporate influence in rulemaking within the federal bureaucracy. What are the mechanisms, the avenues by which corporate actors, concentrated power, special interest groups exert influence on federal rulemaking and the regulatory review process?
Senator, thank you for that question. We have to ensure that when we call for public input, it's the real public. I think that there are some who are sophisticated enough to hire representatives who understand the system well enough that we might be hearing from them in louder voices and more organized voices than we do from the general public, who are the most impacted, and ensure that we get regulations right. So I think we have to have a regulatory system that regular people can understand and be involved in their government, because I do think it is easy for corporations with a lot of resources to bring those to bear, certainly in the public comment timing of regulations. We need to make sure we're actually hearing from your constituents and not representatives that have the money to bear, to make sure that their facts are the only voices that we're hearing during that public comment period.
Thank you, Ms. Young. And where organized interests who may be on different sides of an issue have the greatest capacity to weigh in an organized way on the rulemaking process, do you view the federal rulemaking process and the public comment aspect of it as one where those organized interests are balanced, or do federal agencies and OMB have an obligation to independently assess the true public interest, regardless of how various organized interests are weighing in via public comment?
I certainly think we need to ensure that our system is hearing from, and we have to assess whether or not, or where it's being generated. I mean, look, they have the right to also petition their government and let the government know their opinions. But if we have a system so complicated that only those with resources can effectively get to their government, so I think it's beholden upon OMB and the agencies to ensure that we are getting to the public where they are, so they know how to petition their government when they're not represented by major financial backing.
Thank you so much. And will you work with my office and this committee, Ms. Young, should you be confirmed, to try to make more responsive and more accessible that process so that ordinary people can weigh in and make their voices heard?
Absolutely, Senator Ossoff.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young. I'd like to talk about a couple of issues of particular concern to my constituents in Georgia. At Fort Gordon in Augusta and at Fort Benning in Columbus, there have been consistent long-term concerns about the health and safety of base housing, and military families who have had to endure unsafe, unsanitary, unhealthy conditions at base housing. And the commanding officers at both facilities, I believe, are making diligent and good faith efforts to address that issue so military families in Georgia can live in safe conditions. Will you commit to working with my office to ensure that federal resources necessary to ensure that housing on post at Fort Benning and Fort Gordon is safe for our military families?
Senator Ossoff, you see me smiling because my partner with me was born at Fort Gordon in Augusta and grew up in Augusta. You actually absolutely have my commitment. Also, this is a good example of when we talk about defense funding, it matters not just the top line, but what's in it. And we have a lot more to do on basic life safety projects with military housing. Our men and women in uniform deserve at least that much.
Well, I know the military families in Augusta and Columbus will be grateful, and I appreciate the Georgia connection in your family. I'd like to ask you as well about a major infrastructure project, which is the Port of Savannah, where a multi-year, very expensive deepening of that port, which is vital to Georgia and indeed national prosperity, is over budget and behind schedule. Will you work with my office and with Mayor Van Johnson in Savannah to ensure that federal funds are dispersed appropriately and with all appropriate speed so we can complete that project without any more cost overruns or delays in the schedule?
I've heard a lot about the port in my years on the Appropriations Committee. I understand the economic engine that it is, the dredging, what it is to the rest of the country, not just Georgia. So you have my commitment to working with you on that long-standing project.
Thank you so much, Ms. Young. I'd like to ask you about the roles of inspectors general at federal agencies and just offer you the opportunity to reflect on how OMB can instruct or encourage components at other federal agencies to comply with requests for information by inspectors general in the interest of good governance. Would you be willing, to the greatest extent of your capacity, should you be confirmed to this post, to issue such instruction to senior government executives that they must comply within their components with requests for information from inspectors general?
Yes, Senator Ossoff, one, I hope that is happening. Where it's not, you certainly have my commitment to work on the issue writ large, and if there are any issues, serve as someplace that can help resolve those issues between the IGs and the agencies they serve.
Thank you. And final question, please, Mr. Miller, my remaining time. What is your view of whether the specifics of apportionment decisions made by the administration via OMB should be posted publicly?
Senator, thank you for the question. First, just briefly on your prior question, if confirmed in the role of the Deputy Director for Management, I would serve as the Executive Chairman of the Council of Inspectors General for Integrity and Efficiency, and I think it's absolutely imperative that OMB repair the relationship with Inspectors General and make sure that they have the resources and the access necessary to do their jobs.
Thank you.
With regards to the specifics of apportionment, something that I would commit to work on. As I understand it, the OMB has returned the authority associated with that to the career staff and will follow long-standing past practice.
My question is, what is your view, your personal view, on whether apportionment decisions should be posted publicly?
On whether apportionment, Senator, it's not the specifics of apportionment decisions is not an area that I've spent significant past time on, but I would be happy to follow up and talk with you further about what's past practice and how OMB is going to proceed and make sure that the work that we're doing, including spending data and spending decisions, are done in a transparent way.
Okay, I'd be grateful for that for the record. And Ms. Young, did you want to weigh in?
I know from where I sit now, OMB has provided some of the apportionment data, well, all of it that the Appropriations Committee has requested to date. So, the legislative solution to this, I think we're all going to have to work together, but I do believe when a committee of Congress asks for, that apportionment data, OMB should be responsive, and I've seen that in action. During my time on the Appropriations Committee, we were finally able to get apportionments from the Office of Management and Budget in the last 2 months.
Okay, and we can return to the question of whether it should be posted publicly as a matter of course. I appreciate you. Thank you for working through this process and for your answers today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ossoff. Well, we're coming to the end of the hearing. Just wanted to raise one final issue with you before we wrap up. As both of you are well aware, cybersecurity is a persistent challenge for federal agencies as well as across our economy, and particularly been challenging to attract and retain the specialized cyber workforce necessary to deal with this challenge. I introduced in the last session two pieces of legislation, was working with OMB, and we'll hope to, if confirmed, we could continue to work with you. It's the Federal System Incident Response Act, which is legislation that arose out of the SolarWinds attack and how we deal with that more effectively going forward, those kinds of attacks, and the Federal Rotational Cyber Workforce Program that will help us both attract and retain quality cyber professionals who make it their mission to serve the federal government and make the job even more rewarding than it already is. So I would hope, if confirmed, both of you would commit to working with me and other legislative proposals and make these a priority to deal with the cyber threat. Would you be willing to make that commitment, Ms. Young?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Miller?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Well, wonderful. I'll look forward to working with you, and I'll say that it has been a pleasure being here with you during the hearing. Appreciate your willingness to serve the country, and congratulations on your nominations. In closing, just say that both Ms. Young and Mr. Miller have made financial disclosures and have provided responses to biographical and pre-hearing questions submitted by this committee. And without objection, this information will be made part of the hearing record, with the exception of the financial data, which is on file and available for public inspection in the community offices. The hearing will remain open until 12 p.m. tomorrow, March 5th, for the submission of statements and questions for the record. And with that, this hearing is now adjourned.